Manchester United will approach this summer's negotiations from a completely different position, not just in terms of results, but in how they are perceived across the market. They're back, yes, but more importantly, this isn't a temporary spike or a fortunate run of form. What we're seeing is a structured recovery, one that has gradually reshaped both their trajectory and their identity. Not long ago, this was a side drifting outside the top four, exiting cup competitions early and struggling to define how they wanted to play. Under Michael Carrick, that trajectory has been flipped entirely as they climbed from 7th into the top 3 while collecting 19 points from a possible 24 during the most decisive stretch of the season, creating a gap that now feels sustainable rather than fragile. What stands out, however, is not just the points total, but the way the team now operates. Carrick hasn't reinvented football, but he has stripped things back, simplified roles, and reconnected players with positions that actually make sense for them, which in turn has restored something United had been missing for years, the basic feeling of being a coherent team. Wins against sides like Manchester City and Arsenal were not isolated peaks, nor were they driven by momentum alone. Instead, they were early indicators that a functional structure was beginning to take shape and hold under pressure. Within that context, the UEFA Champions League is no longer just a competitive objective, but a strategic pivot point. With a top finish now within reach, United are no longer entering the market from a position of insecurity, where they need to convince players to take a risk. Instead, they are gradually returning to being a destination, a club players are willing to choose on their own terms. That shift has already started to surface in recent dealings, and it will become far more pronounced once they formally secure Champions League football. If we narrow it down to a single underlying theme, this summer is about posture. United are negotiating as a club on an upward trajectory rather than one searching for stability, and that distinction fundamentally changes the dynamics of every conversation. Earlier in the season, they lacked both Champions League status and a clear footballing identity, which meant selling clubs could inflate prices, while players themselves approached negotiations with hesitation. Now, the context is entirely different. Even after the draw with Bournemouth, United entered the international break sitting third with 55 points, maintaining a comfortable cushion over the chasing group, while Champions League qualification has shifted from a distant ambition to a realistic expectation. Under Carrick, they collected 22 points from 27 early in his tenure, and that level of consistency has altered how both players and clubs interpret United's project when sitting at the table. Beyond results, though, the more significant development lies in the clarity of the footballing narrative they can now present. And that matters more than anything else. Top players no longer make decisions based purely on salary. They want to understand the system they are entering, the role they are expected to play, and whether the environment allows them to perform at their peak. Carrick is finally giving United credible answers in all three areas. Bruno Fernandez has rediscovered his influence, while players like Cunha and Šeško have begun to leave a tangible mark, forming a spine that makes the team structurally convincing. Fernandez, in particular, has re-established himself as both the creative and emotional driver of this push towards a top-3 finish. The Premier League has highlighted how he continues to elevate those around him, in line with the team's upward curve, while Reuters reports that he has surpassed 100 assists for the club and is now closing in on historic assist records within the league. When a project on the pitch begins to take on a clear shape, its persuasive power in negotiations increases exponentially, because players are no longer buying into a promise, they are buying into something visible. If you step back and compare, the contrast with last summer is stark. A year ago, United entered the market without real clarity, not because they lacked targets, but because they had too many priorities at once. They needed midfielders, attacking reinforcements, centre-backs, and full-backs. And when a club feels compelled to fix everything simultaneously, it doesn't reflect ambition so much as a lack of direction. The real issue last summer was simple. Manchester United did not know what to prioritise. This summer, they do. Part of that comes from having already addressed certain attacking issues, which reduces the spread of urgency. But the more important factor is that they have clearly identified a systemic bottleneck, the midfield. With Casemiro almost certain to depart after both sides agreed not to trigger an extension clause, this is no longer about incremental improvement, but about a full reset in that area of the pitch. At the same time, they have effectively secured the future of Kobbie Mainoo, and internally, he is no longer viewed as a developing talent, but as a long-term cornerstone. In practical terms, that shifts expectations entirely, because his role is no longer about gradual integration, but about becoming a guaranteed starter in the near future, anchoring the next phase of United's rebuild. From this point, the structure starts to reveal itself more clearly. Kobbie Mainoo is set to become the focal point, but what matters is what builds around him. This won't be about plugging in a single signing and hoping for balance. It's far more likely that United bring in 2, potentially even 3 midfielders with the intention of reshaping the entire unit rather than patching it. Because the reality is already obvious. Manchester United lack depth in midfield to a worrying degree, and it doesn't take much for the system to break down. The moment 2 key starters drop out of form or fitness, the entire structure begins to stall, and progression through midfield becomes predictable, slow, and easy to disrupt. That fragility has been exposed often enough to leave no room for doubt. And identifying that core weakness is precisely why United head into this summer in a fundamentally different state of mind. This is no longer about entering the market with a vague, overloaded shortlist, chasing multiple profiles without real priority. Instead, the focus is far more direct. One area, clearly defined, and a commitment to resolving it properly rather than superficially. However, the more nuanced point here is that a stronger position does not automatically mean unlimited financial power. In fact, the financial picture still carries pressure. According to Reuters, the club's debt had risen to £295.7 million by the end of 2025, while cash reserves had dropped sharply to £44.4 million. Revenue is still projected to sit between £640 million and £660 million for the year, which on the surface remains strong, but the underlying trend makes it clear that they cannot continue spending in the same way indefinitely. Start with Elliot Anderson. On current form, he's arguably the most in-form name on United's shortlist. The difficulty here isn't just the fee, even if it could rise towards €80 million with add-ons. The bigger issue is the player's preference. Anderson appears to lean towards Manchester City, largely because he trusts the structure under Pep Guardiola more than a Manchester United side that, despite recent progress, still carries traces of instability in its recent identity. Then there's Sandro Tonali. In terms of pure profile, this is exactly the kind of midfielder United should be targeting. He brings balance, he stabilizes those around him, and he operates comfortably across both defensive and attacking phases. Tonali has already proven himself in Serie A, adapted to the Premier League, and performed on the Champions League stage. If United are serious about competing in Europe next season, profiles like this are not optional. Bruno Guimaraes presents a different kind of case. This is a plug-and-play midfielder, someone who requires minimal adaptation and can immediately elevate the level of any system. His control, tempo management, and composure under pressure make him universally compatible. But the questions here are tied to age curve and long-term value. United have already experienced similar situations with players like Matic or Casemiro, elite in quality but limited in longevity. From a financial perspective, this is not necessarily the most efficient investment. Perhaps the most accessible option on the list is Carlos Balaba. This is more of an opportunistic move. His current form hasn't been explosive, and there are signs of stagnation, which is reflected in a valuation somewhere in the 40 to 50 million euro range. But if you look deeper, this is a bet on upside. Balaba has rare physical tools, covers ground aggressively, and offers a profile that can develop significantly within the right structure. His reduced role recently seems more connected to tactical shifts than to any clear limitation in ability. And in a window where United may need 2 or even 3 midfield additions, this kind of deal becomes almost essential from a squad-building perspective. Looking at the bigger picture, the real difference for Manchester United isn't necessarily who they are targeting, but how they are approaching those targets. In previous windows, they often operated from a position of urgency, which left them exposed, overpaying, and reacting rather than dictating. This summer, if they secure Champions League football and maintain their current trajectory, the dynamic shifts. They are no longer the club trying to force deals through at any cost. Instead, they become the club that can make players reconsider their options. And that is what truly changes the game.